You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday, the 17th of April. Have our councils learnt anything? Brighton Council considering safe rooms for drug addicts' injections. Islamic extremists plan to drive remote-controlled car bomb into territorial army base. Human rights judges stop UK sending Abu Hamza aid to the US. Reverend West, maggot-minded media pundits. Council of Europe, Greece could ban right-wing group Golden Dawn. Italian businessman 6 this month to take life for economic reasons. Boston Marathon bomb attack. Record-level opium crop in Afghanistan. Teenager exposes India's 1-month wives to sex tourism. Thought for the day, strangers in our midst. And finally, rather overdoing it in Wiltshire. Have our councils learnt anything? A grandmother desperate to protect her 3 grandchildren from a predatory paedophile has won a vital round in her battle to make Islington Council recognise the risks of abuse. Islington Council refused to take her concerns over the release of her daughter's ex-boyfriend from jail and back into the community. The ex-boyfriend was convicted of a sex attack on a 10-year-old boy. The grandmother says the children have already been groomed by the ex-boyfriend and she's afraid to let her grandchildren leave the house alone. Islington Council threatened the grandmother with prosecution after she kept the children out of school because she feared they would be accosted by her daughter's ex-friend. She had asked the council to rehome her and the grandchildren outside the borough, but the council said she was overprotective and her concerns were overblown as the children were at no more risk than any other child in Islington. But last week 3 appeal court judges handed the grandmother an important victory when they ruled that in October 2012 assessment of the risk posed by the paedophile to the children was fundamentally flawed. Lady Justice Black said a police officer asked to report on the case had initially said that there was no real threat of the children being snatched by the mother's ex-boyfriend and that there was little danger of them being targeted for abuse. However, the same officer later performed a dramatic about-turn, saying that the paedophile had a history of abusing children known to him and that no youngster who had had contact with him could be considered safe. The council must now carry out a fresh risk assessment and reconsider the grandmother's plea for her and the children to be relocated a safe distance away from Islington. Brighton Council considering safe rooms for drug addicts' injections. Drug addicts will be able to inject themselves with crack and heroin in safe rooms as part of a scheme being considered by Britain's drugs death capital. Brighton is set to become the first city in the UK to provide official drug consumption rooms where addicts can use heroin, crack or cocaine under supervision without fear of prosecution. Public health leaders in the city will meet this summer to give serious consideration to the plan, which they say will save lives. Last year Brighton and Hove was once again named and shamed as the drug death capital of the UK. Islamic extremists plan to drive remote-controlled car bomb onto territorial army base. Terror plotters discuss sending a remote-controlled toy car carrying a homemade bomb under the gates of a territorial army centre, a court was told. Zahid Iqbal, 31, and Mohammed Sharafaz Ahmed, 25, spoke about using a banned terrorist manual entitled "Make a Bomb in the Kitchen of Your Mom" by the Al-Qaeda chef to make an improvised explosive device. Woolwich Crown Court was played covert recordings of the pair discussing attaching a bomb to a remote-controlled toy car and sending it under the gap of a gate to a territorial army centre in Luton. Human rights judges stop UK sending Abu Hamza aid to the US. A lieutenant of hook-handed cleric Abu Hamza has won his fight against extradition to the US after European judges defied British courts to block the move on human rights grounds. He is wanted in the US where he is alleged to have plotted with Hamza to set up a jihadi training camp. Haroon Aswat, 39, from West Yorkshire, is currently in Broadmoor High Security Psychiatric Hospital being treated for paranoid schizophrenia. The European Court of Human Rights yesterday barred the Home Secretary Theresa May from sending terror suspect Aswat to the US, because he's being treated for mental health problems. The court found that there was a real risk that Mr Aswat's extradition to the US and to a different, potentially more hostile prison environment would result in a significant deterioration in his mental and physical health. Aswat has been fighting extradition since 2005. He's estimated to have cost the taxpayer more than £600,000 in prison costs and legal aid. World Addict says, bully for Aswat, yet another Islamic terrorist over here on our money being looked after. Send him back to Pakistan, they can pay for him, or indeed, what happened to lethal injections? European news. Council of Europe. Greece could ban extreme right group Golden Dawn. The Council of Europe's Commissioner for Human Rights says Greece should consider banning the extreme right-wing group Golden Dawn, which has 18 seats in the country's 300-member parliament, and urged authorities to take tougher measures to combat a surge in racist violence. Niels Muiznieks told AP in an interview Tuesday that Greece would be fully within its rights to ban the party from public office. The Commissioner, who visited Greece from January 28th to February the 1st, said in a 32-page report published by a Strasbourg, France-based organisation Tuesday that he was seriously concerned by the increase in hate crimes targeting immigrants in Greece. The report describes Golden Dawn as a neo-Nazi and violent political party that should be isolated under legally binding international human rights conventions signed by Greece. World Addict states, Golden Dawn has been elected by the people and has every right to be in existence. This is the danger that all nationalists face nowadays, the liberal lefty lovies who choose strangers over their own people. This attitude is growing and will cause further dissension and misery until the world in general wakes up to the fact that multicultural democracy does not exist. It is a pipe dream. It does, however, destroy nations, which is the intent of the far left. Italian businessman sixth this month to take life for economic reasons. A factory owner killed himself near Pisa Monday in the latest in a string of suicides apparently linked to economic difficulties. 6 of them this month alone, police said. The businessman, 65, whose factory at Santa Croce del Sarno made chemicals for fertiliser, reportedly left a note citing business woes as the reason for his suicide. Last week, a man afraid of losing his job in an eyewear factory near Belluno and a carpenter whose business was in trouble in central Sardinia took their own lives amid the rising toll of deaths linked to economic problems. Earlier this month, 3 people, a married couple and the woman's brother, committed suicide in March near San Marino, gaining front-page headlines. Businesses are closing at an unprecedented rate, employers' associations report, while unemployment is at a record high in Italy's worst recession for 20 years. The head of the Confederation of Italian Industry last week urged politicians to reach a deal after February's inconclusive general election, saying businesses were desperate to see some government action almost 50 days after the poll. Parties are set to elect a new Italian president later this week, who will have the job of gauging the chances of a government forming, or, as many pundits think, calling a snap vote for July. I now hand you over to the Reverend West, who talks today about maggot-minding media pundits.
Maggot-minded media pundits. I have not had many dealings with the media, and I would be the first to admit that not all of them are maggot-minded, though a good many of them are. But they have certainly been having a feeding frenzy this week over a football manager and his alleged political views, even though he has recently been engaged only to manage a football team and not a government or a political party. One should obviously stick to what one knows, but that goes for the maggots of the media as much as for anyone. My problem with the maggots of the media is that they do not seem to know anything, and that they are experts in nothing, literally nothing. That brings me to another M word, not maggot, but Marxist. I suppose if, like many of the media maggots, you have been trained up or rather drained up in Marxism, you will not be able to tell your left from your right. If you were pretty clueless before you went into journalism's training or draining colleges, you would be even worse when you came out. The only thing that they seem to know anything about is the only thing that they think that they know everything about, and almost the only thing that they ever talk about. And yet these maggots cannot define it. Have you noticed that everything is racist nowadays? Even a blackboard and chalk is racist. Well, if a blackboard is racist, I said to one of these stupefied maggots, then racism is nothing to worry about. The person concerned, who by the way had a degree in something, possibly journalism, looked stunned. That brings me to another subject, education. Education seems to be the god, or rather goddess, of the age. Indeed, we have a pantheon of gods and goddesses, served and worshipped by our inane, post-Christian society. We worship and serve anything today, from our sacred amoeba, the ancestor from whence we came, to Tony Blair or his conservative counterpart, David Cameron. If this is what the education system is producing, then something is clearly wrong. Education is supposed to improve, not make us worship the slops and dregs of political thought and social change. But here we are. I suppose you can only get out of something what you put into it. I will say no more. The non-nation Conservatives and the anti-nation Labourites have done a pretty awful job of destroying the concept of the nation, and the family for that matter, and yet they wonder why society is needing to address the issue now of cohesion. Well, that is the very thing that they have been trying to destroy since about 1948, when the British Confetti Citizenship Act was passed to give all and sundry the right to dwell here. It has not been helped either by the debasement of the welfare system, which had encouraged both irresponsible fathers and women. No wonder we have problems. Outside Leeds Crown Court in 2006, where they were trying to frame Nick Griffin for inciting racial hatred against a religion, I was careful to shout to the anti-fascists, as they love to think of themselves, that they too needed an education. The trouble is that far too few have gotten an education since the 1950s, when the teacher training colleges were stuffed with neo-Marxists who were determined to undermine national consciousness and educational rigour in favour of change, that other maggot word which is so beloved by our maggot-minded media pundits. Well, where do we go from here? It is a blessing, I suppose, that more Conservatives are abandoning the party that abandoned them long ago, and are finding a home, however temporary, in the United Kingdom Independence Party. But will UKIP deliver? In the end, and in the long term, I do not think so. What will be the alternative then? Surely a party that is moderate, decent, well-toned and well-tuned to the values and aspirations that most of us have for everything good and decent on this side of the grave. We had a lot of that before the maggot curtain came down over our minds and created for many of us a false consciousness about what was good, honest, beautiful and true. I wonder if we can recapture that consciousness and vision, which we once had but which is now badly maggot-eaten by the brain-dubbing of the media. For I'm sure that, if we are determined, we can. It is in our history. It is not just nature, it is nurture too. We need to throw off the darkness, much of it is in the church, and put back on the light.
Thank you very much, Reverend. A good treatise on our media today. World News: Boston Marathon bomb attack. Tuesday, 16th April. 3 dead and 140 injured in 2 bomb attacks at finish line of Boston Marathon. CBS Boston station WBZ-TV reports one of the 3 who died from the attack was an 8-year-old boy. A Saudi national is helping the FBI with their investigations. He denies any involvement. The Telegraph reports 347 British and 108 Irish runners took part in the marathon, amongst some 27,000 runners from around the world. Authorities in Los Angeles and New York City have stepped up security in their cities, and British police are reviewing security plans for Sunday's London Marathon because of the deadly Boston bombs that hit the marathon Monday. Wednesday, 17th of April. The FBI has confirmed the Boston Marathon bombs may have been made from pressure cookers after recovering fragments of dark nylon, BBs and nails from the scene. The Boston Marathon blasts are typical of the lone wolf, a source with knowledge of the investigations has told CNN. The source was referring to a lone terrorist who builds a bomb on their own by following a widely available formula. In this case, the formula has been likened to one that Al-Qaeda has recommended to its supporters around the world. The threat of the lone wolf alarms the intelligence community. The person who did this was someone's friend, neighbour or co-worker, De Laurier, the special agent in charge of the Boston FBI office, said at a news conference yesterday. He went on to say, someone knows who did this, as the investigation, still in its early stages, turned to the possibility of a homegrown terrorist. World says, if the Phoebes can turn it into a white homegrown loony, they will. Anything to avoid offending the Muslim communities in the US. Someone always knows who does these bombings. Record level opium crop in Afghanistan. Afghanistan's opium crop is heading towards record levels, a bleak forecast warns, as the country risks becoming a narco-state despite hundreds of millions of pounds spent to combat the drug trade. The United Nations early assessment of the 213 crop found farmers were planning to plant more poppy than last year, marking the third annual rise in the drug's cultivation. UN officials predict the increase will push this year's crop close to 2007's record level and again see Afghanistan responsible for more than 90% of the world's heroin. World says, of course this was the main reason for the invasion of this country, but our troops are on strict instructions not to kill anyone or fire the poppy fields, just provide target practice for the natives. Wonderful. Teenager exposes India's 1-month wives' sex tourism. A 17-year-old girl has exposed the scale of Islamic sex tourism in India, where Muslim men from the Middle East and Africa are buying 1-month wives for sex. Campaigners for Muslim women's rights said that while short-term contract marriages are illegal in India and forbidden in Islam, they are increasing in Hyderabad in southern India, where wealthy foreigners, local agents and qazis, government-appointed Muslim priests, are exploiting poverty amongst the city's Muslim families. The victim, Naushim Tabassum, revealed the scale of the problem when she escaped from her home last month after her parents pressurised her to consummate a forced marriage to a middle-aged Sudanese man who had paid around £1,200 for her to be his wife for 4 weeks. She told police she'd been taken by her aunt to a hotel where she and 3 other teenage girls were introduced to a Sudanese oil company executive. The groom, Usama Ibrahim Mohammed, 44, and married with 2 children in Khartoum, later arrived at her home where a qazi performed a wedding ceremony. According to Inspector Vijay Kumar, he had paid 100,000 rupees, around £1,200, to the girl's aunt Mumtaz Begum, who in turn paid 70,000 rupees to her parents, 5,000 rupees to the qazi, 5,000 rupees to an Urdu translator, and kept 20,000 rupees herself. The wedding certificate came with a talaknama which fixed the terms of the divorce at the end of the groom's holiday. Thought for the day. Strangers in our midst. My thought today is for the strangers in our midst, which you might think is strange for me as an avid and eternal anti-immigration persona. But my thoughts centre around how one day we might have to send the majority of these people packing. It's useless to beat around the political bush or consider the people who make money out of many of these poor people. We might just have to reconsider British survival, both economically and realistically. I've heard all the arguments for immigration, and apart from a few successful intermarriages or business dealings or indeed friendships, all these arguments pro-immigration can be discarded in the real hard world today. Most of these arguments are carried out by different and varying political parties for their own gain. Firstly, they get voters they wouldn't normally have, and secondly, as far as the media and publicity go, it all sounds so rosy, caring for the underdog, and always seems to appeal to people who simply don't care for their own underdogs, let alone another country's underdogs. So you have to take away the Asian all-night convenience stores, the millions of Chinese, Thai, Nepalese, Indian restaurants and kebab takeaways, the equal number of franchised pizza and southern fried chicken outlets, and they wonder why the Brits are getting fatter. All the packing and sorting sandwich factories, what will BA do now, I wonder? All the home markets taken over by Asian stallholders, the inevitable rise of cheap Asian-owned shops taking over the high street, the halal businesses and factories, and the pompous takeover attitude of the majority of our newcomers, and Britain would be on the way to restoring what we have lost. I personally have no quarrel with the immigration status of around 40 years ago, before the massive hordes intruded onto our little island. I like a cosmopolitan society. A lightly mixed society makes an interesting society. A smattering of ethnic professional peoples living and contributing to our country makes sense, and it is because of what we Brits have accepted in the past that we are expected to accept and like in the present, together with its ever-growing numbers and altered states in the future. In Two Nationals over the weekend there were two very good arguments against further immigration, insofar as they couched the terms in a language that would appeal to the more delicate amongst us, or perhaps the less realistic of what our future could and might be. These articles, written by Melanie Phillips, Daily Mail, and Leo McKinstry, Daily Express, are worth listening to by our prospective election candidates for the opportunity to pick up the wordings they have used. They were sent to me by a very well thought of activist from within our party. His comments are at the end of the quotes. Melanie Phillips. On Tony Blair, she writes, he concealed his own radical agenda to transform British culture and identity through Labour's policy of mass immigration. Then on Cameron, she says, the public's most deeply felt concerns over Europe and immigration were either betrayed by empty promises or totally ignored. People want passionately to govern themselves in accordance with their own historic culture. They do not want their country to be transformed to an international entrepot of competing tribes, but to identify with the recognisable and shared characteristics of their nation. Leo McKinstry writes, of Blair's belief in globalisation, where traditional patriotism gives way to liberal concern for the entirety of mankind. This warped thinking led to a fanatical embrace of mass immigration to create a diverse Britain. But this strategy, beloved of the snobbish metropolitan elite, did far more damage to the British working class than did Mrs Thatcher. As annual new foreign arrivals reached 600,000, British workers found it impossible to compete. Living standards plummeted, unemployment soared, public services came under intolerable strain. In Blair's boom years, more than 5 million people were on the dole. Blair destroyed working class solidarity through his obsession with diversity. He divided Britain, not Mrs Thatcher. His gigantic experiment in social engineering means many of our own citizens feel aliens in their own land, with white Britons a minority in Leicester, London and Luton. Blair compounded this treachery with other measures, such as the damage his government did to industry. Under Blair in the decade from 1997, the share of GDP from manufacturing fell from 20% to just 12.4%. Our activist comment on both authors is, and I quote again, particularly accurate is Leo McKinstry's comment on how Blair divided Britain. Our opponents sometimes accuse us of dividing communities, but it's quite obvious that that is not us, but the immigrationists who have brought divisions into our country, especially with their policies of multiculturalism. In reality, ours is the one party that believes in a one-nation Britain, of the English, Scots and Welsh and Irish, whilst we do not believe in the mad ideology of creating a mass of competing tribes, as Melanie Phillips puts it so neatly. An excellent term for us to have at our fingertips or on the tip of the tongue. By the way, like so many Jewish people, she can see how things really are in this country, and she's not happy with the way she can see things going. Another reason why we should see them as being potentially very much on our side. Which reminds me of something I once heard Jonathan Sacks as chief rabbi say on the radio. That was that the economy is there to serve us. We are not there to serve the economy. This is a very useful quote when people inaccurately and untruthfully claim that immigration has been good for the economy. A report from the House of Lords came to the conclusion that it has not benefited the economy. Even David Goodhart, a Labour man who has just published The British Dream, a revealing book about immigration, has written, immigration has not clearly made Britain richer or more content. And there you have it, in good debating prose, why massive immigration carried on further into the 21st century will do anything but benefit this country in particular, but Europe in general. However, it is from within the EU that some of our largest numbers of and most contentious immigrants have been creeping into the UK, and indeed are all set to creep some more in 2014. Nothing upsets our huge existing Muslim Asian communities as much as the Poles and Eastern Europeans flocking into what they consider their business and habitat domains. There have been grumbles over the way the Poles in some Asian-ridden areas have brought out their Muslim or Indian counterparts and set up successful shops and businesses. And of course our media have encouraged that aspect of unwanted immigration because it centres on a white race versus a brown race. And the brown races are always right, even in someone else's country in the first place. And that is what really makes me angry in the oncoming probabilities of shortages of jobs, food, education and all the public health and welfare services in the UK, that most, if not all, of the newer immigrants are not grateful to be here. They do not want to integrate, apart from an incident I saw today. They carry their own so-called culture and religion with them, and they breed to fill what spaces we have left in our country. And they appear to think it is their God-given right to just appear on our shores, and we, the increasingly poor indigenous population, give them monies and rights we don't even allow our own people to have in their own land. Today, whilst shopping in our local Tesco, oh joy of joys, I noticed entering the shop a woman from the Saharan subcontinent, or the sub-Saharan continent. That is what we're getting in Hampshire now, sub-Saharans and Nepalese, and believe me, if I were a racist, which I'm not, I would comment just how black these people are. They are like an oil slick in motion. But I digress, as that is not electoral speak. But anyway, she made her way into the shop and was met by an older white guy, and they embraced, so obviously married, I would think. At the same time, on my way out, an equally black youth was sauntering back out, looking for all the world as if he just jumped off the nearest lorry, and his attitude was, I'm king of this hill, so what? And he got into a brand new car and swept away. Now at that time of day he's obviously not in any sweatshop, so how can he afford a new car? Which is, if you listen to me on Monday, a very sore point indeed. My point being is that when these immigrants come in, they bring their tribalism with them. Let's face facts, all of these migrants have come from countries that are third world and in trouble because for the most part these people are backwards. None of them even get on with each other apart from taking money from each of their fellow migrants to get over here, usually through France and that sodding tunnel, and no one gets on with the Muslims. So here we are, busy importing foreign gangs and criminals and indeed trouble for us Brits on a civilian level and for the prison system, which is already groaning under the weight of foreign customers. No wonder we are the laughingstock of both Europe and the world. Now, joy of joy, not only are the Muslim sexual antics with our underage girls being ignored, but the Indians have brought their caste system with them. Now this caste system is far crueler and more widespread than the old British class system. You ain't seen nothing yet with this Indian lot. Similar in many ways to the divisive nature of Islam, where a young girl falling in love with another Muslim is killed because he's not from the right family, the Indian caste system covers generations of fellow Hindus who are relegated to starvation and poverty by virtue of their ancestry. A much more racial idea than the Third Reich ever thought of, and much, much older. The British when in India tried to stop it, but the Indian character prevented any breakthrough. What character? Well, charming, manipulative, devious and lazy works every time. I quote from our activist, India's caste system. On BBC Radio 4 this morning I heard a report about how the caste system has crept into this country to such an extent that some Indians are being bullied, for example children at school, or discriminated against by other Indians. It was explained how the lowest caste, called the Dalits, are regarded as fit only to remove human excrement, and so they are not happy with the way they are treated here, by other Indians of course. Some of them want caste discrimination to be covered by equalities legislation, and it seems that the proposal has got through its first hurdle in the House of Lords. However, there is opposition to it from some Indians and it may not get through the House of Commons, so watch this space. So we have in our schools now Muslims and Asians bullying white children, black children bullying white kids, Muslims bullying Hindus and Sikhs, Hindus bullying other Hindus of a lower caste, Eastern European kids bullying each other and the Nepalese kids bullying everyone. And we wonder why our formerly great education system has gone to the dogs, because it is the dogs who own it now. So amongst the safe words and the sensible approach, the true information lurks. The right will have to rise again, because the truth of the matter is that England has given Labour, the left, socialism and multiculturalism a good chance for the last 40 odd years, and look where we are. We're hosting, at risk of life and limb, a vast number of foreigners who will never be British in my eyes, and moreover do not want to be British in reality, who will fight for their own causes and people who are divided in every sense of the word, unless you count united against us indigenous Brits, who have and will terrorise us more and more, who will take from this country at every opportunity, many of whom operate from their mother country whilst taking money from our mother country, who set up criminal gangs, promote drugs and prostitution and worse on our youth, who occupy swathes of England, whether by occupation or ownership, who are still continually coming into this land unchecked and who believe we Brits owe them a living. So when voting, or even if thinking about it, remember these people are allowed in for a reason: to divide and conquer. A frightened, hungry population is much easier to control. The EU are finding that with their financial policies. Blackmail is a very useful tool, and killing your neighbour for food is another. Only which way would that go? Think very carefully, my friends of the future. Even the very near future may already be mapped out for us. Only the British National Party sees both sides of the coin on immigration, and the cons outweigh the pros. And finally, rather overdoing it in Wiltshire. From UPI, Swindon Council in Wiltshire have gone to town with yellow driving lines painted on a 4-foot wide alley. The local officials from the city said contractors who painted yellow lines down the centre of the alley must have forgotten how big cars really are. Residents of Swindon said they were shocked to see the lines had been painted down the centre of a 60-foot long alleyway, even though the barely 4-foot width of the alley makes it impossible for cars to use, the Mirror reported Thursday. When bushes are overgrown you can hardly even walk down there, so you wouldn't ever think to drive, said Emma Stratford, 22. It's all rather silly. We laughed at it, but it has definitely been a waste of money. A Swindon Borough Council representative said the lines were painted by contractors as part of an initiative to crack down on illegal parking in alleys. It seems that our contractors forgot just how big cars actually are when they painted this one, the representative said. We will be taking it up with them. This presenter says, oh dear, and these are the people who get paid to draw lines in the sand. You have been listening to The World at 8. I'm glad that the funeral of Baroness Thatcher went off without idiots letting down the siege yet again. The world has enough ammunition to laugh at us without providing more. I am Lynn Mozart, and I wish you all a very good night.